I remember back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a general sense of optimism brought about by technology. The idea was because of the internet, smartphones, digital cameras, social media, all these kind of things, that public communication and the dissemination of information was so universally accessible now that totalitarian societies were going the way of the past. That from here on out, people would have access to reliable information. They would be able to look it up, and propaganda was just not going to be a thing anymore. Well, obviously, that didn't prove to be the case, but I think the Russo Ukraine war is probably the best kind of counterpoint to that sense of optimism. More so than just about any other war in history, we have satellite feeds, we have social media posts, we have stuff from people on the ground, we have leaks from insiders. If you go on Twitter or Telegram, you just have these oodles of information, classified, not classified, on the ground, not on the ground, speculation, all this kind of stuff. And the vast majority of it is very contradictory, or it's what's kind of funny is it used to be back in the day there was maybe two, three, or four different perspectives that were being pushed, and the facts were being manipulated to support them. Now, instead of two or three or four fake narratives, we have 3 or 4 or 5 million fake narratives, each of which portray just a little piece of the whole. And so, in a lot of ways, I could argue that this is the war in history that we know both the most about and the least about. If you listen to the pro Russian crowd, the Ukraine is down to like 10,000 soldiers, all of their weapons are done. It's just 2 more weeks, guys. Trump can still be president. Putin can still take all of Ukraine. It's almost over. If you listen to the pro Ukraine side, it's like Ukraine has taken Archangel, sorry. They're passing by Volgograd, and they're well on their way to Kamchatka. And these two narratives are just completely at odds with each other. And every aspect of this war, from like the casualties to destroyed equipment to who controls what, the degree of which the variance in these numbers are like things I've never seen. Because I've seen like the estimates for the number of Russian casualties I've seen are between 13,000 and 130,000. I think some are actually higher than that. Maybe to just give like a maximum range, something like between 10 and 180,000. And there's like orders of magnitude difference. And we really have no idea. We really have no idea how many soldiers each side has. We have no idea how many tanks each side has. If you listen to the Russian perspective, all of Ukraine's pre-war tanks, all their Soviet tanks have been destroyed. Their army's completely crippled. If you listen to the Ukrainian side, it's the same thing. So I just find it interesting, if for no other reason than from, I guess, a sociological standpoint, maybe, just how much the fog of war can really obscure the conflict, even with all of this information available. And I would say the last couple months of the Russo Ukraine war are what I like to call Schrödinger's war, wherein absolutely nothing has happened, but a lot of things have happened. There's been no progress on the war, but there's also been a lot of progress on the war. The war shows no signs of ending anytime soon, yet it may very well be close to ending. And that's how a lot of this conflict's been, and I bring up the whole part about us having really no idea what's going on. Because I know I've fallen into this trap a couple times myself. I kind of got swept up. So back in the late summer and fall, Ukraine launched a huge number of offensives all along the front line. They retook all their territory in the Kharkov, Kiev, some of the Kherson region, and they pushed the Russians back from a lot of the territory they seized at the start of the war. And Russia lost Kherson, which was, I think, the biggest city they had taken. I can't remember if it's bigger than Mariupol or not, but they lost Kherson. It looked completely and totally humiliating. If you watch the media at the time, they said like Russia just ran away. They left all this equipment behind. The Ukrainians got tens of thousands of new tanks. They got all the ammunition they could ever need. It was like a gigantic victory. Just bazillions of Russians died. And a lot of people were counting Russia out. They're saying that was a complete and total embarrassment. That was a disaster. Russia completely lost the initiative in the war. It's only a matter of time until Russia has to cave and go to the negotiating table. Now, though, we're seeing that it may be going in the opposite direction. Rather than almost being defeated, Russia could be on the verge of quite a large victory. And the situation on the ground may be a lot better than people are saying. Once again, you have the whole issue where we really don't know what the troop numbers are on either side. The thing a lot of people have been covering, though, is trying to figure stuff out from the stated amount of munitions the Ukraine is using compared to what the actual shipments of stuff are. And I've seen in a lot of videos, if you actually break it down, and this is probably the most objective thing we can find, you'll see like the Ukraine is using 6,000 shells a day, and like an American military aid package might have around 10,000. And they'll make that seem like that's a big deal or something, but then you'll be like, that's a day and a half of firing rounds. And that's all they're going to get for like the month. And the U.S. has no capability of producing anywhere near the number of rounds to even keep that rate of delivery up, let alone increase it to a point where Ukraine can actually use its artillery effectively. And it's more or less the case with everything else. Like, once you really start to look at it, I was watching one video today when they were talking about TOW missiles, and the U.S. is sending like 2,000 of them, but then they also said that TOW missiles have like a 20% hit rate in a training scenario by trained U.S. Army soldiers. And obviously the Ukrainians are going to get what, like a 1% hit rate? They don't know how any of these weapon systems work. That's not me insulting them, that's just kind of the reality. So how many tanks are they actually going to hit with those 2,000? Also, Russian tanks have like reactive armor. How many of those tanks are they actually going to damage? They're going to knock out? Because I could see them blowing through all 2,000 missiles, maybe knocking like 4 or 5 Russian tanks out and not killing anybody. And once you start to go through it, it's like, oh, we're giving like 300 of these rockets for this one launcher and 200 for this other one. And if you start to do any of the calculations, it really does seem like they're completely out of everything. And that they're like the stuff that they're giving them isn't even really a bandage at this point in time. It's slightly slowing down the flow of blood. It's slightly slowing down the depletion of the Ukraine's resources, but it's not even maintaining where they're at, let alone if they want to launch another offensive. And that, I think, is something that is objectively true, and that is one of the few objective measurements we can get out of this, is that overall there is clearly becoming a shortage of weapon systems. The fact that NATO and the US have just started sending just random stuff like 10 of these, 20 of that, 50 of these, we're going to send these one-offs, I think is a good showcase of how desperate stuff has gotten. And I've said pretty much since the beginning of this war, I don't really think a lot of this stuff is very helpful. Unless they're going to get American soldiers to crew these things. Modern warfare is really hard. There's a lot of computerized stuff. There's a lot of sensitive machinery. There's a lot of maintenance required, a lot of repairs that are required. We aren't dealing with Shermans or T-34s anymore. We're dealing with stuff that like breaks constantly and gets like software bugs and all kinds of just stuff you didn't even have back during World War II. And like we're supposed to expect that the Ukraine's going to get like 20 Leopard 2s. Somehow within the next like 2 weeks, they're going to be able to have the logistical system to provide them with the proper caliber rounds, enough spare parts, mechanics who are trained to use them, crews that are trained to make use of them, and all the computer stuff on it. Who knows if the interface is even translated into Ukrainian, for that matter? That's a good question. Like, what percentage of this stuff is even available in Ukrainian? And so, like, the Ukraine is having to use, like, 20 different missile systems, each with different ammunition types, each... And, like, once again, I'm not saying that the Ukrainian army are, like, stupid or inept or anything, but people just can't be expected to fight under those conditions. I mean, imagine if like your I don't know if it'd be a brigade. Your brigade had like 15 different types of small arms that all use different calibers of ammunition. How is that supposed to work? Imagine if none of them had interchangeable parts. They all required completely different maintenance kits. It's just it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the fact that at the end of the day, the amount of stuff that they're sending them is not enough to keep a war going. It just isn't, regardless of what the actual situation is on the ground. And a point I heard recently that I think made a lot of sense was, why does Ukraine need any of this? If we were to believe what Western media was saying back during the offensives, they captured billions of tanks, massive dumps of ammo. They took all the Russian supplies. Ukraine had a bigger tank force than they did before the war. Um, Everything's going amazing. They turned the tide, except they're out of tanks, they're out of munition, they're out of all this other stuff. We have to just give them more resources, and eventually maybe something will change. Once again, take these with a giant salt mine, but my understanding is Russia is firing like twice as many artillery shells a day as the Ukrainians are, and it can be kept up pretty much indefinitely or for much a longer period of time. It's kind of like interesting to take a look at all the money, all the bloat, all the overproduction, all the crap that the American defense industry has pumped out for the last 30 years. And when a war actually happens, they're incapable of making any of the shit that you actually need to fight the war. If you look at it, they're like, we're going to ramp up our self propelled howitzer to like maximum production of 60 a year. We're going to build like 20 missiles a month, and Ukraine uses like 500 of them a week. And it's like the most just pathetic tiny amounts. They don't even have enough like basic artillery shells and bullets and stuff, from my understanding. And this is what the US like taxpayers have been spending. I think it was their defense budget used to at least be more than the rest of the world combined, or almost as much as the rest of the world combined. Anyways, close to half the world's military spending, and they don't have enough stuff to like give to another country along with the rest of NATO to fight a 1 year war. I know this is something whenever I used to, it's kind of ironic because when I used to watch Binkoff's Battlefields, and whenever he would do some sort of versus fight, the war was basically mostly over in the first like day or two, because countries have such small stockpiles of modern weaponry. They basically just blow through all their missiles in like a matter of days or weeks, and then the rest of the war just kind of comes down to a stalemate as neither side has any functioning weapon systems left. On that note, I think another thing that just shows how like incoherent the narrative over this war is the whole like Russian missile strikes. Um I swear that if you start listening to it, the numbers don't add up. It'll be like Russia launched 80 missiles, 90% of them were shot down, 60% of them destroyed civilian targets. And they'll like be this narrative that none of the Russian missiles are hitting anything, they're all being shot down. But at the same time, the Russian missiles are hitting everything because it's an atrocity perpetrated by the Russian army. I mean, they can't both be true. It can't be true that the Ukraine captured an immense stockpile of stuff, but they're completely out of weapons. It can't be true that Russia's losing this war, although they haven't really had any significant territorial losses in months. And if anything, they seem to be gaining ground in the areas where it really matters. I think I think you could also kind of maybe call this the dopamine war, as it's very much it, in comparison to a lot of wars in the past. There's a very short attention span, almost goldfish like, where if anything happens that gives one side a dopamine rush, they immediately go crazy and say it's over. It's Russia's dead. Ukraine's gonna retake Vladivostok. It's the Kiev and Rus are gonna form the new Russian Empire, or Not only is Ukraine going to fall, but Poland is going to be reabsorbed, as are the Baltic states, and that sort of thing. And I think there's just a tendency, like with regards to that, like when Russia took a bunch of territory, it looked like the Ukraine was about to collapse. The Ukraine retook a bunch of territory, and it looked like Russia was about to collapse. And if like nothing happens for a week or something, everyone's like, it's a stalemate, it's over, it's game over, man. This conflict's not going anywhere. The reality is, wars can take quite a while. The Iran-Iraq War went on for 8 years, nearly a decade. The Syrian civil war, in one format or another, is still going on. The Yemeni civil war shows no signs of slowing down. These things could go on for quite a while, and we aren't even 1 year into it yet. We are looking at two large countries with sizable populations, industrial bases, and amounts of weaponry. So it's probably going to take a while while the two of them slug it out. I think once again, though, there's the whole dopamine fix. Russia's taking this ground, it's over. Ukraine's taking this ground, it's over. I gotta go tweet this out. I gotta go post a video on TikTok. That kind of thing. So when I say that everything's happened and nothing's happened, I'm of course talking about Donetsk specifically. I think it's Donetsk, specifically Bakhmut. So the focus of the Russian advances since their withdrawal from a lot of their other gains has been trying to take Bakhmut down here. It's the rest of the Luhansk Oblast and a large portion and a portion of the Donetsk Oblast. The Ukrainians, though, had pumped in an immense amount of manpower, machinery, and stuff like that. And is widely regarded as being kind of the linchpin or the center of the Ukrainian defensive line. And both sides have just kind of gone all in on it. And it's believed by a lot of people that whoever wins here will be in a position to press the war, will regain the initiative. The Ukrainian offensives have petered out. My understanding is Russia is starting another one in the south to try to take Zaporozhye, or however you pronounce it. But the main focus is they've gradually just been sending all of their mobilized troops either to other parts of the line to move their experienced forces to Bakhmut, or just otherwise trying to get in. And over the last couple of weeks, if you look at it, they have been making pretty steady progress. They took where's Solidar? Yeah, they took Soldar in the north. They're going in the south. Bakhmut is rapidly getting surrounded. There's a lot of Ukrainian equipment and men in there. And if the Russians have said they've operationally surrounded Bakhmut, which basically means that they can hit the roadways with their artillery, but they aren't physically surrounding it yet. And who knows if they do manage to take it, just how many Ukrainian soldiers they'll manage to collapse. And they have all of this force in one area. So if they get a breakthrough, maybe they're just going to go and retake the rest of Donetsk in one big offensive. We don't really know. It's also quite possible that Ukraine, even if it doesn't have the resources, will just do another YOLO to try to change the narrative. Because if Bakhmut falls and that Ukrainian front starts to collapse and Russia restarts taking land, then the whole narrative that Ukraine's winning this war, we're turning the tide for the fifth time this war, is going to collapse. At the moment, at least, though, something that doesn't look likely is a negotiated peace. Zelensky has made the return of Crimea and the Donbass region as a precondition to have talks, as well as reparations from Russia. None of that stuff is going to happen. Even if Putin was somehow overthrown in a military coup, I really doubt the successor Russian government would give Crimea back under any circumstances. You would have like another revolution in Russia if that was to happen, and the coup would have a counter coup. My understanding, and once again, if you read The Economist, Russia's a failed state with no economy. Other people are saying that Russia's economy is actually better, which I find hard to believe. Uh, my From my understanding, what probably happened was Russia probably initially lost a lot of money and resources because of their breakup with Europe, but they have replaced that at least somewhat with a greater dependency on China. And the economic warfare against Russia, because it's fairly self sufficient, was not nearly as bad as people thought it was going to be. And it does look like they will have the military industrial capacity to continue waging this for the foreseeable future. So, did I really provide any prediction of what's going to happen? No, because I don't really know at this point in time if you can really predict what's going to happen. Definitely, I think the next phase of this war will be what happens when Bakhmut falls. Maybe it'll be a nothing burger. Maybe it'll just fall. Nothing will happen. The line will just get moved back. Or maybe this will be the breakthrough that Russia needs to regain the initiative. I'm not really sure. This could be their winter offensive. It's just that it's in a very narrow piece of territory, and it's not as like effective and as flashy as some of the other counteroffensives the Ukrainians launched were. Regardless, though, it's going to be interesting to see, and I will be eagerly watching the war as it continues. And just, it's a good learning opportunity. It's not that often you can watch history, particularly an industrial war like this, unfold in front